Welcome in, everyone, to Hogville and good afternoon. I hope the third time's the charm and not three strikes you're out. Tried this a couple of times this morning. Here we are, 1:30 in the afternoon, doing our HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If you haven't done it already, first of all, thanks for joining me, but also please go hit subscribe, like, share. Those things help us out, and we love bringing you the content. Look, I want to get caught up on some class of 2025, some stuff that's really kind of heating up in recruiting for the as Arkansas and John Caliperi still probably have three more players to add to the current roster for the upcoming season. It's hot and heavy right now. When you look just ahead to the early November signing period, some of the top five-star players, top 10 rated guys in the country. We know Caliperi has a track record and a history, the best in college basketball when it comes to recruiting high caliber high school players. And it'll be no exception in the class of 2025. And we've got some information on a couple of guards, both rated in the national top 10. Both of them are 5 stars. One is already taken a visit to Arkansas. The other one was set to begin his official visit today. That's been put on hold. At least we think it's on hold based on the way it was described to me by the player. We'll see what it means. We're going to delve into some of my thoughts on both players. We're also going to look at some frontline pieces from that 2025 class, talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to also talk about the latest scheduling news that came out late last week. The last time I was on, we talked about the midweek schedule break that we learned about Arkansas, Illinois, and Kansas City. Since then, we've learned about Arkansas playing a familiar in-state Division I program, at least familiar in the last few years, which will be the Central Arkansas game. So I'm going to get into all of those things and a little bit more today. Once again, thank you for joining me, giving folks time to jump in here again. I apologize. Technical difficulties earlier. Apparently, YouTube decided to change where you have to change the default on a vertical setting on your image to horizontal. They completely move it to another area. They never give you advance notice of this stuff. You just have to figure it out. And I was not prepared for that. Been doing it the same way for years, and it changed up. So I figured that out. In the meantime, we'll need to talk more about that. So I appreciate anyone that's come back in to see me to enjoy the content. Hopefully it's valuable today. I've got some intel on a couple of players. No intel in terms of where they're going to go. I mean, there's some opinions on that. I'm going to talk about that. But let's start first with the player who has visited Arkansas, class of 2025, national top 10 5-star point guard Thomas Acuff Jr., 6'3", IMG Academy by way of Detroit. Took an Arkansas visit weeks ago. Has also visited Kansas, Kentucky's a place where he visited when Caliperi was the head coach there. And so there's some other teams that it really looks like for Acuff Jr. By the way, he had an outstanding run. Lead Team USA under 18 to a gold medal in junior national competition just a few weeks ago. But highly coveted guy. You expect that of a top 10 rated 5-star player. But there are some different opinions right now out there when you talk to different people about where Acuff's going to go. There's a few out there that have emerged in the last week by some of the national recruiting analysts, source information provided to them. And you've seen some of these crystal ball type projections for Kansas from some of these national folks. One of the national folks just yesterday emerged, Jacob Polachek with On3 Sports and part of Kentucky's network. Used to be with Zag's blog, and that's how I knew him, Adam Zagoria. But Jacob put a prediction in yesterday for Arkansas. So that was the first one I've seen publicly, projection from Arkansas from one of the national recruiting analysts. And so I recently worked with Jacob on a piece he did after Caliperi was hired to Arkansas. I contributed that. We've exchanged back and forth messages in the past, and we had some exchanges yesterday. I dove a little bit deeper. So even though it's public knowledge that he made this prediction, I went a little bit further and said, well, Jamie Shaw, who's also on On3 staff and does a great job with recruiting, just a week ago had predicted Kansas. I'm like, so you guys work together. Did y'all kind of compare notes now that you're jumping out a week later with a different, the opposing projection? And he said they did. And, Polachek says he's got a source that he trusts above other things he's got, that it's going to be Arkansas. So we're going to see about that. It's just a little bit of information there, a little bit more than what you could see if you're looking at these things publicly. Because a lot of times when you see projections come out and then a week or two later you see a shift in that, others sometimes follow the lead, sometimes they don't. And you wonder, what do people really know? And so Jacob Polachek's telling me, credit to him, that the source that's given him the Arkansas lean is the way he put it. And then, the question becomes, how long does this take? But he also has some people talking to him that believe Kansas thinks soon enough that this could go their way, the Jayhawks way with Darius Acuff Jr. So he does hear from people like that. But for whatever reason, the one he's listening to the most is the one that's telling him Acuff likely to Arkansas. And so that's why his projection is there. So I'm kind of paraphrasing what he told me in a conversation. I was trying to get an idea, his back and forth with Jamie Shaw, since they both have different opinions on where this is going to land, and both put these out within a week of each other. So it's not like months ago there was this one idea and now it's being updated. I'm not sure where others are going to fall or if some of these projections change based on what Polachek did, and who knows. So we're going to see how that plays out. But I find it fascinating and interesting because as someone who covers this stuff, and a lot of times I have a beat on where guys are going to go before they do, and I just have to wait till they announce it. Things can change. And so how quickly does Acuff make his decision? What other things could factor in? Certainly NIL is going to play a part. Kansas is strong in NIL. We know Arkansas is strong in NIL. So these are, two coaches when you look at Bill Self and John Caliperi, who, they go after annually. They get their share of five-star level guys, and sometimes that stuff goes back and forth. So we'll see. But I do think it's down to those two schools. I do believe that. But again, whoever gets this player is getting arguably the top lead guard in the country, arguably the best lead guard in the country. Anytime you're ranked inside that national top 10, you got a case there as the best player in the country as well. And again, this young man has been on a visit to Arkansas. He did take a visit. I think Michigan has also been involved with him. But I do think right now, unless something changes on the top two, I do think it's Kansas, Arkansas. And again, you've got the latest opinion from Jacob Polachek that it's going to be Arkansas. So we'll see where that goes. Obviously, Arkansas does not have any commitments for the future. Everything's been this current roster, this current 2024 recruiting class. When you look at the players that John Caliperi brought with him from Kentucky that were signed and/or committed, he got half of that class to come with him. Brought another 3 players over with him from the roster last year out of Kentucky's roster from the portal. Trevor Brazile, the last man in this top 9, the ones that Caliperi was targeting first for this roster, off the board last. And you had 2 big, just huge lottery. To me, you struck the lottery when you talk about guys like Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu, and proven track record is, and how they project in this next coming season. Everything always then becomes, how do these guys gel? How do these pieces fit together? Last year, we saw proof that sometimes what looks to be a deep tournament run kind of roster at Arkansas under the previous regime was anything but that. And so those things can happen. But having said all that, we're now looking ahead a little bit because the early November signing period, a lot of these players are getting down to their visits right now. They may be making decisions soon. Some of them will make them before their senior school year starts sometime in August. Some will wait closer to the deadline for that 1 week window for the early signing period. And then, of course, some of them will carry it on into the spring. You see less and less of that, but with some of these 5-star guys that have a lot of options, sometimes you may still see some of that. And so you've got to be prepared for any of that. But I do think now that we move into the next talking point, Malik Thomas, the 6'4" guard out of Pittsburgh, going to play at Overtime Elite this coming season for his senior season. That was announced not that long ago. He has had already a top 10 rated player coming into the spring, 5-star guard. Plays the 2, can play the wing. I mentioned Acuff is, you could call him a combo guard. I see him as a lead guard. But Malik told me yesterday with his visit to Arkansas, expected to start today and go through Thursday. He told me last night, look, I'm not going to be arriving on Tuesday. And I thought, well, maybe it's pushed back a little bit. Maybe it's a day. And so I followed up with him. And then he gave me a little bit more info and said right now he's had to postpone it. He told me something's come up for now. He doesn't have a new date scheduled, but he's looking to visit later on. Okay. There's a lot of takeaways from that. This young man's coming off an official visit to UConn last week. The Huskies were already considered the favorites. And with Dan Hurley returning, the roster they've got, the players and the talent they've got in place for the upcoming season, They're also looking ahead. I mean, this is all that you get a lot of balls in the air, a lot of juggling when you're at that level of college basketball, especially UConn right now has really had success putting guards into going into the NBA the last couple of seasons. When you look at the Hawkins, who ended up at New Orleans Pelicans, a first round pick, and an early top 15 pick in that draft. Then that was last draft, and then in this upcoming draft for 2024, Stephon Castle, a 2-3, but it will be a shooting guard in the NBA. He's a projected lottery pick, a top level guy. So you've got that as a selling point for UConn. Took that official visit. Was supposed to again visit Arkansas starting today through the next few days, and that's not going to happen right now. So there's several takeaways from that. The first one for me is it may be one of these situations where he's decided on UConn. It's just a matter of timing for when he wants to announce it, and he's not going to take other visits. I know he's been to visit Pitt of the ACC, but that's his hometown, Pittsburgh. I believe he's visited Auburn. There may have been some other places he's been to. I don't have it all in front of me right now, but the thought was here with UConn being an official visit last week, and then Arkansas, maybe those two would be a horse race there. With postponing this, is it really postponed, or is he just really waiting to announce at some point here soon? Could it be today or any day in the near future that he's going to commit to UConn or somewhere else? Or maybe, anything. There's a lot of things we can speculate on because there's other possibilities. That seems, being someone that covers recruiting, when these things happen like that, a lot of times, maybe even most of the time, that's what's going on. They're ready to commit somewhere else and they just haven't done it yet. Or something could be a conflict and he needs to reschedule it. Anything could happen from here on. Add more schools to go visit. There's more than 2 or 3 ways this could go. Obviously the next step at some point when you finish taking visits is at some point you're going to commit and make an announcement. It seems to me he's on a fast track in terms of doing an early period signing. And so a commitment obviously would be forthcoming at some point. Could it be very soon again? Could UConn be a situation where he's ready to commit soon? Is this thing going to play out a little bit? He really is going to reschedule with Arkansas. Could there be other teams that jump in the mix? There's all kinds of things I think that could possibly be in play here. We just don't know. But I wanted to give you that much information. I did tweet this part out last night. I didn't talk about Acuff yesterday on Twitter or social media or on the message board at HogvilleNET. We're doing that now. I did tweet out the Malik Thomas's status with quotes from him about this being something where he doesn't have anything scheduled yet. He's going to have to change and come in at a different time. Again, I just kind of went over what that can mean and how it could play out. I saw a lot of responses on social media, on Twitter, a lot of replies and posts from UConn fans that were celebrating last night. I saw a lot of that to that post. Razorback fans, not so much. It's not the news you want to get, but it's the news that we got. And who knows? Maybe maybe it's just a situation where it moves forward and they get him on campus sometime this week and into the weekend. I mean, you just never know. There's all kinds of ways that this could change. And when it does, or if it does, we're going to come back and talk about it. But I thought these 2 things are very important, these 2 developments with these 2 5-star players, because Caliperi, again, I'm going to go back to his podcast last week, his last time we've heard him on the record, talking about recruiting. And he went through, how his process is going to be. On the Dan Patrick show, the last time I was with everyone, I went through my, what I pulled from that, the top 3 things that my impressions from watching that. I hadn't seen the Jim Rohn version of it. Later that day, he did 2 podcasts on a Wednesday. And then I did go back and watch the Jim Rohn live stream, or it was at that point archived. And it was almost identical talking points. I mean, it was almost identical through the stuff he went through. So there wasn't anything new gleaned from that. But again, the more that you hear him describe his new process, I can't take 6 or 7 high school players anymore. It's going to be 3 or 4. We'll see about that. But this is why, even though there are a lot of fans are still paying attention to this first season, how does he complete this roster? This is not out of turn talking about this stuff because it's getting hot and heavy in that class of 2025 recruiting. You've got a big July coming up with live eval sessions. July typically is when players either really move the needle and make big leaps or solidify what their status is, or sometimes they fall back. But the way Caliperi recruits and the level of players he targets, pretty much most of these guys are going to remain in your top 10 to top 15 or 20. And most of these guys are looking ahead at potentially likely being McDonald's All-Americans. And so not everybody he recruits will be that, but just the two guys I mentioned. So evaluation will not be as much about what goes on in July for these guys. They can make decisions now. They can wait and do it in their own time frame. But this isn't one of those things where they're holding off to see what July brings and changes their fortunes. They're on a who's list of everybody wants them, top level schools, blue bloods. So they're on their own timeline. And so we just pay attention to it because they're already into visits and have been. So again, we'll see what shakes out with Thomas Acuff Jr., Malik Thomas, both class of 2025, both backcourt players, both 5-stars rated in the top 10. Kind of ran through all that. We're almost 15 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We persevered today. What would take most men, an average man, 3 minutes to figure out. It took me about 20 earlier today, and I decided to calm down, get back at 1:30 and do this. I'm glad we did that. Oh, we've got more to talk about, more news since we were last on. And I mentioned Malachi Marino. The previous staff recruited him. He's an in-state guy out of Kentucky. When I say in-state, relative to where Cal was at his last job, and where he was recruiting him up until taking the Arkansas job 2 months ago. But I brought Malachi Marino's name up because we were talking about the offer for 2025 big man Chris Sinak Jr., who has been a monster chart climber because of his big spring. 6'10" center, can play the power forward, but a center that Arkansas offered a little over a week ago. And I was talking about him. And I said, if you go back and look at these 5-star class of 2025 offers so far, it's been mostly backcourt players. And then when you looked at the front court guys, there were more of those, 4-spot guys that would really kind of factor in to your 4 spot. When we started talking about Cameron Boozer and Koa Pete and even Caleb Wilson, some of these top 10 rated guys that are 5-stars, more of your small, combo forward, or at best, maybe you could call them power forwards, certainly. But looking at the 5 spot, Chris Sinak Jr. was the first offer that I've seen from Arkansas in terms of that class of 2025. And so I, talked about him. Then I mentioned the only other player that I'm not really sure about at the moment, and this was a few days ago when we did on one of these HogvilleNET YouTube lives, either the last one or the one before that, I brought up the name of Malachi Marino. I'm like, that's a guy that was being recruited at Kentucky. I don't know where things stand now in terms of Cal at Arkansas and what's going on there. I didn't have a lot of information on that. But what we have seen, we've seen Marino release in the, I think it was yesterday, released his top 8. Maybe it was Sunday. But the last couple of days, he released his top 8 schools, and Arkansas among them. Now, sometimes when you pare a list down and you still see that many schools at this point in the game, some of those really aren't in your top 2 or 3. Some of them are just ones that have been recruiting you. Remember, the previous staff was recruiting Malachi Marino. I believe he came in for an unofficial visit. He did come into Arkansas to attend a game, I believe, at some point. But also, Cal had been recruiting him at Kentucky. And again, he was an in-state Kentucky guy. He's rated. He's, he was at 1.610. Some services now list him at 6'11" or 7 foot. But he's a post player. Versatile guy, but he's also ranked top 25, top 30, kind of different services, right there on the cusp of being a 5-star. Some service may have him as a 5-star, and certainly a potential McDonald's All-American for that 2025 class. But he released his top 8. Arkansas's on the list, as are Kentucky and Louisville, a host of Big Ten schools. So there's eight teams there, 8 programs there. So I don't really know exactly what that means as far as Arkansas and a real level of interest there. But I think both of those frontline pieces are interesting for Caliperi looking ahead, because what do we know going back to this first high school class that he's bringing with him from Kentucky to Arkansas? He had a couple of big men on there. He had a center and a tweener 4-5. When you talked about Jaden Quaintance and Somtu Cyril, those guys didn't travel from Lexington to Fayetteville with Cal. It was backcourt guys, wings, guards and wings that did. And so he got his big men out of the portal, and Trevor Brazil returning to Arkansas. And of course, Big Z following him from Kentucky, but a freshman played 15 games last year. So why do I bring that up? Only because I'm interested to see what kind of momentum Arkansas gets in high school recruiting under Caliperi when we're talking traditional 5-spot guys. Because Caliperi and Kenny Payne, who are now back together, have a rich history of not only recruiting high-level bigs, 6'10" and up, but they have a great track record with them, great success with them over the years. Have had, from the high school ranks, bringing guys in, getting them ready for the NBA, and then they go off and not only have they been high-level picks and lottery picks, but often some of these guys are some of the best players in the league right now. And so when I think about that, I'm like, who's he going to play? Who's he going to get in this next class? 2024 is over, barring someone wiggling out of a signed letter of intent or some weird situation we can't see right now. 2024 is over in terms of the players that were just finished up their senior year of high school. Now we look to 2025. So I'm a little bit fascinated by this front line. There have already been offers out again to some of those combo forwards or more traditional four types, but the 5 spot. When we look at Chris Sinak Jr. getting that offer, when we now see that Malachi Marino has Arkansas in his top 8 or final 8, and then I reached out to a player just on a hunch, had a really good run out in MBPA Top 100 camp a couple of weeks ago, national top 50 rated guy out of that 2025 class, a 7-footer. Caliperi loves size and talent, but this guy was one of the standouts at MBPA Top 100 camp from Potomac, Maryland. Eric Reibe, Reibe, again, rated top 50 by most of the services in the country, a 7-footer, a center. And he told me that Chuck Martin, assistant coach at Arkansas, had recently, just within days of me reaching out to him, I think a couple of days, had reached out to him. And so let's see where Arkansas goes with that. But I'm always going to be, because when you look back over the arc of Arkansas recruiting and the greatest success of the program and all the coaches that have been here, there have been some really good big men, but it's mostly guard dominated. It's mostly guard dominated when you look at, and this could be an era, it could be as long as Caliperi's here, where we see more higher level big man recruiting in sheer numbers and volume, and then how it translates to being drafted and then roles in the NBA, because he's had a career of doing it. Going back through 15 years at Kentucky. So again, these are things I'm always kind of keeping an eye on. You don't want to jump ahead too much and make predictions on things, but let's be alert to it. Let's keep our eyes open. Let's talk about it now. I think all that's important to do. Again, thank you. 22 minutes in. I appreciate you joining me here in the afternoon on Tuesday. HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We've talked about the two 2025 5-star guards. One visited, one hasn't. Where things might be headed with both of them. You might like Darius Acuff Jr.'s chances based on at least one prediction that I talked about that's out there by a national recruiting analyst. There's some other ones that have him going to Kansas. And then Malik Thomas, I don't think it's obviously good news that he's postponed his Arkansas visit that was set to start today. Let's see what happens. It could be an indication he's about to commit to UConn. It could mean a lot of other things. I went through a lot of that. I, again, just wrapped up some names, 3 names I went through in the big man, the 5-spot recruiting. All you have to do is look at this current roster to know, no, he didn't get him from high school, but Jonas Adu, Big Z, and even Trevor Brazil, you got guys listed 6'10" or taller there. They've got experience, and we know since Caliperi's drilling down these classes, high school classes from 6 or 7 to 3 or 4, if he sticks to that, what is he going to use? What positions is he going to identify for high school recruits? I think he's going to try to get as much as he can, not just load up on backcourt or not just load up on front line, whatever he's pulling from high school. I think he's going to try to get not only the best players available, but he's not going to go, if the best 3 players available all play a similar position, I don't think he's going to do that with only 3 or 4 spots if that's truly what he's going to stick to. So I said all of that because there's different ways I'm looking at this and paying attention to. Some of this stuff may seem obvious, but I'm really trying to, as I learn this staff, how they recruit, what they like to do, I try to, being John Malkovich, get inside their brain a little bit and figure out maybe what with this next high school class, where are they going with it? I can tell you one thing: Caliperi's going to land some high-level guys that other blue blood programs and other high-level schools were after. So again, shifting gears now, 25 minutes in. Thanks again for joining us on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm going to shift to the schedule. We had some scheduling news come out following the last time I was on with everybody, and it was Arkansas is going to play UCA, Central Arkansas, another in-state Division I opponent. We know Arkansas went decades without playing in-state schools or scheduling in-state schools. In fact, you had to go back to the late, I guess it was 1987, when Arkansas hosted Arkansas State in the NIT postseason tournament. The NIT made that matchup. Arkansas didn't schedule it. Arkansas had a 20-plus point deficit, had to come back, get it to overtime, and won by 3 to advance. Nolan Richardson's second season, by the way, and a lot of talk was if he lost that game to in-state Arkansas State, he was going to be fired. The first 2 seasons were rocky. Okay, fast forward, Arkansas under Eric Musselman in year 1 scheduled the Little Rock Trojans for an exhibition game on the same day that Nolan Richardson Court was unveiled at Bud Walton Arena. So that was interesting, but it was an exhibition game. The following season, Arkansas hosted Central UCA, Central Arkansas, in its non-conference schedule. That was 2020-21, the first Elite Eight season. The following year, another Elite Eight, a back-to-back Elite Eight year, 21-22, Arkansas hosted in Fayetteville both UCA, playing them back-to-back, and Little Rock. So you had now 4 matchups at that time in 3 years. One was an exhibition game. Arkansas has not played in the last 2 seasons, 2022-23 or 23-24 in in-state schools. So here we are back to it. It's UCA again for the 3rd time, I guess going back, doing my math in the last 5 years. But UCA, but this time Arkansas is not hosting. This time it's going to be played in North Little Rock. So this is interesting to me for several reasons. One is Arkansas, if you look at it from that standpoint and not playing in Fayetteville on its campus, it's been 76 years since Arkansas has played an in-state program away from its home court in Fayetteville. First time it'll be in a neutral site. The last time Arkansas did that was in 1948, a road game in Jonesboro against Arkansas State. So that's in the 40s when Arkansas had a couple of Final Fours, but that was the last time that happened. And so we jump ahead now. The NCAA, when you talk about net rankings, before that it was RPI, but the determination for the North Little Rock games when Arkansas played opponents there has always been that it counts as a home game. It does not count as a neutral site game for the purposes of how those factor into your strength of schedule, your net rankings. Again, back then it was RPI, and so that's been a thing. UCA's campus, however, is closer to Simmons Bank Arena in North Little Rock, than Arkansas is. Quite a bit closer. Does that impact that at all? It may not. It may still count as an Arkansas game. Simmons Bank Arena schedules a game for Arkansas every year there. And so this may be Arkansas's another home game for Arkansas, even though it's a team. Both are having to go off their campuses and it's closer to the other. To me, this should be designated as a neutral site game, regardless of who it is. You're not playing on your home court. You may have the advantage with fans, but that happens anyway with teams that go on the road and play true road games sometimes, not far from home, and then they get a lot of fans there. So, for me, this should be a neutral site game regardless. It's likely going to be considered a home game for Arkansas, but I'll keep an eye on that. Just a little something to look at there. And UCA, by the way, we know it's a Division I program, plays in the Atlantic Sun Conference, and the Bears are you've got a new head coach in John Schulman, but a couple of intriguing players that were studs in high school in the Arkansas in class of 2024 last year. And both of those players had committed and signed elsewhere. When you look at Ty Robinson, the 6'4" guard out of Lake Hamilton, signed with Florida Atlantic when Dusty May was the head coach. Committed and signed with that team at a time where they were coming off a Final Four run. Prior, it was all that was taken care of prior to the season that played out last year, but a ranked team and got back to the NCAA tournament. Big time player, decommitted once there was a coaching change at UCA and decided to play closer to home. And also Dusty May, we know, left to go be head coach at Michigan. And will play Michigan this year. We're going to talk more about other games scheduled again. And so you've got Ty Robinson now at UCA, Lane Taylor, another stud guard out of Farmington. Both of these guys are they're Division I players in my mind, really good players. He had committed and signed with North Texas, another Division I program. And then that's North Texas in recent years has been a very strong mid-major, has had good success in the NCAA tournament. McPherson, their head coach, obviously left to go coach in the Big 12. But still, he committed and signed there, got out of that, and also at UCA. So you're going to see 2 in-state kids as true freshmen, and they don't have to they're not playing in Bud Walton Arena. They're going to play here in Central Arkansas. And so, there's familiarity for a lot of the UCA kids where there won't be as much for what's a brand new Arkansas team, save for Trevin Brazile. And I'm trying to remember, Brazile was out he missed some games last year. I think he did play. I don't remember now what his availability was. I believe he played when Arkansas played their North Little Rock game. But that's the annual game. It'll be interesting again that the fact that it's a neutral site game. Maybe it won't be by the NCAA net standards, but it certainly will be in terms of actuality. So I think that's interesting. Arkansas, the roster that Caliperi's constructed, the talent he has, Arkansas is going to be favored and should. But there's interesting things about it. Arkansas is unbeaten, by the way, all time against in-state D1 or in-state programs, D1 programs, however you want to chop it up. It includes games against Hendrix, who's not D1, OBU, I believe Arkansas Tech maybe at some point, multiple games against UCA, Arkansas State, Little Rock more recently. I mentioned that matchup. Regular season plus the one that was an exhibition game, but Arkansas won both of those. Streak and on the line there against D1. And we look at the schedule. So Arkansas, a date has not been announced on this. I think the original reporting was by John Rothstein. I haven't seen a date, but typically the North Little Rock game is played when it's holiday break for students in Fayetteville. It's usually some point in mid-December through that weekend prior to Christmas. So somewhere in those date ranges is where, the 15th, 16th through is where it has been. The 20th, 21st, whatever. That week stretch in there somewhere is where they usually are scheduled. We'll see if that maintains or if it changes up any. That's what I anticipate. That's really been the workaround, because when the students are gone for holiday break, it's an opportunity to reward fans in Central Arkansas who are going to pack the house no matter who the opponent is, by the way, because it's their only opportunity to go to an Arkansas game. And so it'll be a packed house, and I expect it'll be in that same time frame. Once we have a date that's actually set for that, obviously we'll talk about that. But look, let's go back. I talked about on the last segment, we talked a lot about Arkansas and that Arkansas Razorback Illinois matchup set for Thanksgiving Day. Feast week in college basketball is huge. I think it's going to be televised by CBS, so national eyes on that. And again, that's in Kansas City, a neutral site, the T-Mobile Center. I think there's a lot of reasons to be intrigued by that. How about, if no other reason, we'll call them the twin big Z's, twin sub Z's. I guess the what did I take? What movie did I take that from? The twin sub Z's, but the twin big Z's. So you've got Zvonimir Ivisic and his twin brother Tomislav Ivisic matching up. Illinois plucked an international prize in the twin brother of Big Z of Z, and it's Tomislav. So I guess they wouldn't be twin big Z's, but twin big I's, because their both last name is Ivisic. So the point is, you've got that storyline. You've got Orlando Antigua, who was an assistant under Caliperi prior. He was assistant under Brad Underwood. Caliperi comes to Arkansas. Antigua goes back to Underwood at Illinois. Chin Coleman, who's one of the associate head coaches at Arkansas, also previously was on Illinois staff with Brad Underwood. So you've got some of that coaching stuff there that kind of matters there. And I think it's also interesting when I looked at Illinois' recruiting, some international flavor beyond Tomislav. You've got a top 40, top 50 rated frontliner in addition to a 7-foot plus guy in Tomislav Ivisic. So you've got some guys that are stepping in to maybe for that Coleman Hawkins void, and then some. But you lost a lot. The Illini lost a lot off that roster. I think one starter returning, and so Arkansas is a situation where you're kind of reloading, rebooting, and it's not just about your roster. It's a new coach and staff. Still, not the first rodeo for John Caliperi, not the first rodeo at a new place. He's had huge success everywhere he's been. I mean, look, he's taken 3 programs to a combination of 6 Final Fours, and UMass, Memphis, and Kentucky, a national title win at Kentucky, 3 national title appearances, including 1 at Memphis and 2 at Kentucky. Ton of conference champs, all that. So this is not, the level he's recruited, the way that he's chopped up and did the distribution with high school portal, bringing guys with him. I look for Arkansas to preseason be ranked. Illinois, I'm not so sure. We'll see about that. But I think Arkansas could be somewhere in that 10 to 15 range. I tend to think the potential is there to be a top 10-ish kind of team. I don't expect them to come in preseason ranked top 10, but I think maybe they've moved the needle with the 9 they have. Let's see what else they add. To be interesting, closer to 10. We'll see about Illinois, but this is a worthy opponent, obviously, a neutral site. Big Ten school. We know Arkansas, mentioned earlier, playing Michigan in the Jimmy V Classic. That date is either December 10th or 11th. I've heard two different versions of that. Either way, it's about 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving Day matchup against the other Big Ten school, Illinois. Also neutral site, Madison Square Garden for the Wolverines. And that's part of the Jimmy V Classic that's played annually. It's been going on, 25, 30 years now. And, when I look at Dusty May as a new coach, John Caliperi is a new coach at Arkansas. So both guys have changed jobs. So there's all kinds of little storylines to look at when we start jumping around. But two Big Ten matchups in non-conference sandwiched around on December 3rd. Arkansas will play at Miami on the road. The Hurricane as part of the ACC-SEC Challenge, the second year of that. It's a return game for Caliperi. His Kentucky Wildcats hosted the Hurricane last year. In the first year of the challenge, Arkansas obviously beat Duke at home, a top 10 ranked Duke team. So Miami, after going to a Final Four 2 years ago, near the bottom of the barrel in the ACC last year. We know Arkansas was bottom of the barrel in the SEC. I don't expect either of those teams to be weak like that in this season, but we'll see. Miami also has had a good high school recruiting situation, some good players out of the portal, and a couple of studs returning to a team that was that they were actually part of that Final Four run 2 years prior, but they did lose a lot to the portal, and a lot of key guys. So, so you right now we know about three high major opponents, national TV, when we're talking ESPN or CBS, made for TV events, and all three of those games are played away from home, and all three of them are in a 2 week span. Thanksgiving Day, December 3rd, then up to December 10, 11. So let's see what else backfills. We know Caliperi's talked about a meeting in Dallas, some matchup that Arkansas is going to have in Dallas at some point in non-conference. The only way that's a road game is if you're playing SMU. It will be in its first season in the ACC. With two Big Ten opponents in non-conference and an ACC opponent already in the challenge, and we just went through those, I would love to see Arkansas play one of the top teams, a sexy matchup I'm looking for out of the Big 12. I really want Arkansas to play a Big 12 team. I talked about it before. I'll just roll through some of the teams I'd be ecstatic with. Obviously, Houston, Baylor, Arizona. Those would probably Kansas. How do I leave Kansas out? To me, any of those four, you ring a bell on that. Neutral site in Dallas, man, that'd be a hell. Any of those, I think, are going to turn heads around college basketball. And then, there's some other ones that wouldn't hurt my feelings if it ended up being something like a Kansas State. Arizona State, also new to the Big 12. Colorado's coming in to the league. Would you play Texas Tech? Texas Tech was a good team last year. Illinois was a good team last year. There's some other things that are in there that might be a little bit intriguing. But again, let's see who it is in Dallas. It could be Gonzaga. I mean, Kentucky played Gonzaga last year in February. Is this a game in Dallas that gets played at a weird time once you're into conference play, once you're already in the middle or toward the end of your conference play? Caliperi and Kentucky have done that. So keep your eyes open for that. Let's pay attention to all of that. And then Caliperi has also talked on working with some program on a home and away series. So that if that gets worked out, you're thinking maybe it's as soon as this season, either you host a game or you go on the road, and then the following year, likely you're either hosting or on the road, and that's how you work that one out. And it's not one of those one-off made-for-TV events necessarily. So these are all still things we're paying attention to. We've also been told that Rocco Miller, who does a lot of reporting on social media on scheduling stuff through Division I college basketball, a few weeks ago, put out that Arkansas is going to host Oakland mid-major, Division I mid-major on December 30th. So if that's true and holds up, that's the team that we know knocked Cal and Kentucky out. One of the biggest upsets in the NCAA tournament last year, just a few months ago. Cal's talked about it, talked about how that's helped him retool or re-envision how he's going to drill down and pare down the high school part of the recruiting and focus more on portal. I mean, it wasn't the first upset for Kentucky in the last handful of years in the NCAA tournament. And so you turn a page there, but now you're bringing Oakland into Fayetteville. I think it's great. If you're going to look, you're not going to play stud programs for all of your 13 non-conference games. It doesn't work like that for anybody. But you can lose at home to mid-majors. Last year, Arkansas lost to North Carolina Greensboro. Kentucky and Cal lost to North Carolina Wilmington. It happens. Oakland could be that kind of a game, but at least you're you're in a conversation that people are going to pay attention to, even though it's not a marquee matchup. Typically, Oakland and Arkansas might be a bit of a storyline, even nationally. I don't see any national television broadcast for it, but I think it's a savvy move to bring Oakland in. And if Arkansas loses, we'll say something else, and it'll be a different song. All right, now we just hit 40 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Appreciate it. A lot going on, even though we're out of season. It's recruiting's always going on. There's always something that matters that we need to talk about, and we're getting more and more of the schedule leak stuff. I really like that. Staff stuff, we know Ronnie Brewer Jr., we've established now for a while, he's being retained. What's his title going to be? What does it look like? What happens with that? There's one more assistant spot. You can have 5. That's been the case the last couple of years now. Only 3, plus the head coach, are designated as over the road, away from campus recruiters. You can get exceptions and waivers based on different things to send up certain other members of your staff out. We saw that with Bruiser Flint back in Texas in the first spring live eval period back in May, because I saw him there in person. He's not one of the top 3 assistants. That's Kenny Payne, Chin Coleman, and Chuck Martin. We know that Brad Caliperi has been named an assistant coach, and I think a player development role as well. John Caliperi was talking about this move to Arkansas. Part of that included being able to add him to his coaching staff. He said he'll even get to recruit, go on the road and recruit a little. By saying it that way, it makes me wonder, is Caliperi going to devise a plan where, even though he may not be part of his top 3 assistants who are designated as full-time on the road recruiters, where he oscillates other guys to maybe go on the road and recruit, because you can get waivers based on the availability of some of the guys on your staff for various reasons. There's ways to do it. You have to go through formalities to do it, but you can do it. Caliperi. It leaves a 5th assistant spot open. My question is that going to be Ronnie Brewer Jr.? We've heard just about everybody else announced formally. What is his role going to be? Because we also believe Tyler Eulis, who played for Cal at Kentucky on one of his best teams ever a few years back, about a decade ago, he was a student assistant at Kentucky. I'm told, source told me he's finishing up some degree work, some coursework to whatever. So what does that mean? Does that mean he's going to get the 5th assistant coaching spot? He was a student assistant last year. So where does this shake out? To me, it's either one of those 2, unless Cal surprises us with another name. But I think both of those guys are going to be on the staff, because Caliperi's talked publicly a while back about Eulis coming over. And then we know Ronnie Brewer Jr. has been retained in some fashion. We just don't have a role and title that's been officially announced. Okay, some of this stuff are talking points I've gone over before, but as we move along, I think some of it's worth repeating, even if we don't have a whole lot new there. Again, Joe Johnson's been one of those flirtation things where, there have been conversations that are beyond just having fun with it in terms of him potentially having a role, something that could eventually materialize in theory. So it wasn't just one of those passing, come be on my staff. It was one of those things where they're really looking at a way, how would that work? Is Joe ready to do that? Does he want to do that? How far can that go? I don't have any resolution on that, any finality on that. Don't know that that we'll ever hear anything if he's not added to the roster. We wouldn't be, or to the coaching staff, somewhere in the basketball staff. We won't hear anything if it's not going to happen. That it was ever, there'll be no official word that we were going to do it. And we'll see if Cal ever speaks to it or not. And then if he's added, then we know he is, and there'll be a lot of questions for Cal about that and how that played out. So that'll be cool. All right, so we talked staff. We talked some schedule stuff. Let's do just a little bit. I'm just going to throw in a couple of things here with Pro Hogs. We know the NBA just wrapped up. We've talked about Jordan Walsh getting that title as a rookie, being a part of a championship team, even though, he spent most of his time in the G League and didn't have a rotation role. He did see 5 minutes in the NBA Finals in a 4-1 series win over the Dallas Mavericks. And I mentioned this before, but I think it's really interesting. As a high school senior at Link Academy, he led that team to the Geico National Championship game for national championship game for high school as a senior. Then at Arkansas, he had a rotation role and a big role, most of the time as a starter on a Sweet 16 run. Then he helped the main Celtics, the G League portion of the Boston Celtics, to the G League Finals and then was part of the 15-man active roster throughout the playoffs, the NBA playoffs. Actually played in a before the finals in a couple of games in the playoffs, and actually scored a bucket in one of those. Again, mop up time, but still. So finally, now he gets a ring. But I mean, the guy has been part of a lot of success. I just went through the different layers of it. So good for him. To me, it's not just about the opportunities you get, because it's always going to be about that. When do you get your first real opportunities? It's a process. It's doing the work in the G League. So many players go through it. But it can't hurt to have all these experiences of winning at a high level, because you start to learn. You start to learn what it takes to get there. Even if you're not necessarily all hands on deck for all of it, some of those during his journey, he's been a major force and part of it. The NBA Finals title run, not so much, but still, he's learning as he goes, and there's no better way to learn than to win, in my opinion, because you pick up good habits doing that. All right, I get off my soapbox there, but congratulations to Jordan Walsh. Look forward to doing an interview with him really soon. Going to get him on for an interview really soon. I look forward to that. Big O, Oliver Miller. For those of you that go back to Nolan Richardson's heyday, man, the early '90s. Nolan's first of three Final Four runs at Arkansas in 17 years there. Oliver Miller. Some argue, I mean, he's arguably the best center ever in Razorbacks history. And it's hard to argue with those who say that. You know, Joe Klein's right there. You could go back and forth on that. Jalen Williams, to me, belongs in that discussion. You know, Bobby Portis played the 5 spot a lot at Arkansas, but I see him as a 4. I see him as a 4. I'd probably relegate him more. I think of him in terms more of comparing him to other 4s at Arkansas. Although even in the NBA now, he oscillates. He's a tween. He can play both. Not as a tweener. He does well playing both, but he's mostly a forward. He's typically in a forward's role. But having said that, Oliver Miller, man, inducted into the now defunct Southwest Conference Hall of Fame just yesterday. That announcement was made, came out of the University of Arkansas men's basketball program. Good for him, long overdue. But you go back to that Final Four team. He was a sophomore with Todd Day, Lee Mayberry. What an outstanding, just an incredible team, an incredible run. Mario Credit, Lindsey Howell. This was just, an Arkansas team that he was a big part of. Arkansas in Denver. I had a media assignment working at the Arkansas Gazette for that Final Four. Big O helped Arkansas. They matched up with Duke, got there and lost that game. So lost in the semifinals. Then Duke went on to get destroyed by UNLV by 30 in the title game. But Oliver Miller, probably the most versatile player when you talk about post player in Arkansas history, the most versatile. I'm going to talk about that because this is an era where you don't see a lot of 5 out or big men facing the basket. He could beat you from 94 feet. How long is the college court? Anyway, he could beat you because the baseline out of bounds pass after a made basket. On a dime, he threw touchdown passes to guys, and they weren't always running by themselves to the other end. Sometimes they had a defender, and he still put it where only his guy could get it, and then his guy could make an easy finish. This guy could beat you anywhere on the court with a pass. He could draw you out like he did to Shaquille O'Neal when Arkansas went to LSU and beat the Tigers. And they isolated, put Todd Day. Talk about ISO Joe. Todd Day was one of the best isolation players in college basketball. Arkansas's all-time leading scorer. And they put him in ISO down on the mid-post and low post at 6'7". I mean, he could score from anywhere. But moved him around. But when they played him, they pulled Oliver out, pulled Shaq away from the basket. And Todd Day went to work on Clarence Caesar for 40-plus. Rung him up for a career high, and Arkansas won that road game. But Oliver Miller was a shot blocker supreme at 6'7", 6'8", listed at 6'9", whatever he was. You heard different arguments about that. Had incredible elite wingspan, massive wingspan. His timing, he was a heavy set guy when he played. Everybody knows that. But he was agile. He was, a dancing bear. He wasn't a big leaper, but he had all that arm length. He was so smart in basketball terms, in terms of reading who his man was, understanding how to get an edge. So he timed everything. A 70% plus field goal shooter, so he was a double figure scorer, a plus rebounder, a plus shot blocker. Great passer. I talked about phoning over a defense. I talked about pulling Shaq away from the basket out onto the floor and setting Todd Day up all day long. But he made some great behind the back passes you didn't see, would beat your eyes. But just a great player. And even in his senior season, it didn't finish as well as the sophomore and junior seasons did when you look at the NCAA tournament. But Arkansas's first year in the SEC, and Arkansas wins the SEC regular season. But in the non-conference play, Arkansas had several suspensions. He was among that. There was some, initially there was some crazy stuff I'm not going to get into. But the way that this guy performed throughout his career and dealt with things was just an all-time player at Arkansas. Again, arguably the top 5 spot guy in the history of the program. I'm not going to disparage Joe Klein because he's arguably the same thing. I can make cases for both of them, both out just incredible players. But Oliver Miller, I think it's long overdue. And, this was a guy that went in the first round. Arkansas, after that senior season in 92, I could talk about a lot of moments, the UNLV games, playing Duke twice while he was there. I mentioned one of those in the Final Four. The next season, Arkansas got its revenge in the NIT preseason tournament. A Duke team that would go on and win the national championship and get its revenge against UNLV that was undefeated in the Final Four before, who did Duke play? Duke played, I think, Kansas in the title game and beat Kansas. So, but Oliver Miller, it was at a time when Arkansas was the top 2, 3, 4 program in the country every year. He was part of that at that time. Some people think that a couple of those teams with him and Mayberry and Miller and Ron Huery and Lindsey Howell and some of those other guys, Arlen Bowers, some people think that's actually Nolan Richardson's best team ever. Best team ever. It didn't win a national title. I argue that if the team that won the national title, the best that anyone else could do is a tie if you want to make an argument, some reason that they were better. But there are arguments why you could say the teams that Oliver Miller on were actually Nolan's best teams. In some ways they were. The overall team, no. That was to me, Scotty Thurman, Corliss Williamson, because they ultimately got it done and won a title and got back to a title game. To me, that's the best team ever. Man, but Arkansas's had some great teams. Going back to Eddie Sutton, certainly with Eric Melsman. There's been other teams under Nolan. But to me, Oliver Miller, I'm not understanding why this is inductions happening. And the Southwest Conference is not even around anymore. I don't know how that'll apply to the SEC or how that transfers, whatever that means. But kudos to him. I've spent a lot of time talking about him because anybody that's younger that's watching and tuning in today may not remember him or have learned about him just by doing research. But to go through it and live there, I remember Little Rock, there was an ice storm here, and I had a flight out with Kane Webb, who was the beat writer for this particular game when Arkansas was playing a conference game on the road at Texas Tech. I guess it was a January or February game, and I was 18 or 19 years old, and they sent me with Kane to do sidebar work, to write my sidebar article. And I had an ear infection. It was my first opportunity to get out of Arkansas to cover a game for the Razorbacks, and I wasn't going to miss it. And what ended up happening was we had technical issues then with those old laptops and couplers. And so I ended up just helping get quotes from players and helping Kane with his game story. And I did a sidebar when we got back to Little Rock. I didn't do it there in Lubbock. But Arkansas played at Texas Tech. And, I remember the interviewing Oliver Miller in the Texas Tech locker room. That was kind of cool. All the players, but he was one of them. Anyway, just kind of going back through some of my own personal stuff. I have a great affection for most of Arkansas's teams over the years, but certainly those guys. When I looked at that collection of talent, Oliver Miller, Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, all going in the first round in the NBA draft in 92. You had Day going number 8 overall. And then in the early 20s, I'll probably mess this up, 22 or 23, Miller goes before Mayberry to Phoenix. Mayberry's the very next pick to Milwaukee, where he's going to team up with Day. Miller to Phoenix and Charles Barkley. And then Arkansas had a 4th player drafted in the 2nd round. It was Isaiah Butch Morris who was on that team. They didn't even bring his name up among all the really good players. Roosevelt Wallace a little bit later. I mean, there were so many players in that run at time that intersected. Clem McDaniel was a red shirt at the end of those guys' run and I think played a freshman season with them, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, Oliver Miller going to Phoenix as a rookie helped Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, Dan Marley, that whole group, get to an NBA Finals and play Michael Jordan, among the first of 2 three-peats for MJ, Scottie Pippen, and the Bulls. And it went 6 games. Oliver Miller was a rookie starter for Phoenix. This guy's talent level, you saw it in college. The weight thing was always something they talked about. Can he do it at the next, even, sustain an 82-game schedule, let alone playoffs? And, how valuable will he be? Really, really good player. Because if you're starting as a rookie in the NBA on a team that's playing, not a rebuild, but a team that's, projected as one of the top teams in the league, projected to possibly get to the finals. I think Phoenix might have even had the best record that year. And the Bulls took them in 6. There were some shaky moments there, though, in one of those games, at least 1 or 2 of them. But Oliver Miller, again, he was in the NBA for a while, bounced around a little bit. But again, a great player, one of my favorite all time at Arkansas. All right, 55, almost 56 minutes in. I got in the weeds a little bit talking about Oliver Miller. Really proud of him and that accomplishment. We'll be doing an interview very shortly with him as well. We're going to get some more Pro Hogs over the summer. A lot of talk about, because some of these guys are on their break right now, taking a little vacay time. There's not a lot, getting away from it for a little bit, and then they'll be back working. And you've already seen, I was at Moses Moody's event over the weekend on Saturday. I'm going to finish with that today. A night with Moses Moody as part of his foundation work, his foundation, into its second inaugural event, Motivate One. Last year, for the same thing, Moody brought his teammate Klay Thompson, future Naismith Hall of Famer, four-time NBA champion, brought him. This year it was Rich Paul, the head of Clutch Sports, who's been a little bit controversial. I say a little bit over time. His name's back in social media the last couple of days for comments he made about Chris Livingston, a 5-star that I used to cover and saw play in person, ended up at Kentucky, was kind of throwing shade on John Caliperi about that. There's more than one way to look at that. Some shade could be thrown maybe his way too. That's just part of the game. But at Clutch Sports, that's Moses Moody. That's his agency. It's also Nick Smith Jr.'s agency. That's their representation. But Rich Paul came in. And so they do have like a fireside chat. The place was packed at Clinton Presidential Library, one of the big meeting rooms. It was filled up. It was a really nice night. And Moses Moody giving back. Last year, I think all of his events were spread out over a long weekend. This year, he's breaking it up. This was the first part of the event, was on Saturday night. So we just had that, and then there'll be a camp and some other stuff potentially. So as many as 2, maybe 3 more events upcoming in July. And so we'll talk about that and put some information out. Some people like, local fans in Central Arkansas certainly always turn out for these things when Bobby Portis does it. Isaiah Joe will have his camp in Central Arkansas in July. Jalen Williams is doing camps in Fayetteville and Fort Smith. I'm going to try to hit, if I can't hit all of them, I'm going to hit as many as I can. We'll see more. We're going to see, we'll probably see more as things move on. Daniel Gafford always has an event in El Dorado. But that's usually it's surrounding a game that he plays in. It's a benefit game, and that's has always been in El Dorado High School. So we'll see what he's going to tap as well. I've got to reach out to some of these guys here in the next few days and see what's up. But until next time, I want to thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm going to ask you, if you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe, like, share. We covered a lot today. Anything that breaks that's important, some of these things that we need to get back on, we'll come back on live. If it's today, it's today. If it's the next day, tomorrow, it's the next day. I do plan on getting back with everybody, hopefully before the weekend. Maybe not, but maybe. But until next time, thanks for being here, and I'll see you then.